Thanks for having me out, y'all. Yeah, the gentleman just mentioned the owner of our company, Bob Bale. That sounds just like him. He's stepped down in the last year or so. He's still the president of our company, but out of the day-to-day operations. But luckily, we still get to see him at happy hour more often than not during the week. But yeah, for years and years, Twisted Pine was this one man. Before I get into kind of the rundown of Twisted Pine's history, introduce myself again. I'm Justin Kalata. Been at Twisted Pine for about 5 years. My current role there is a sales and marketing coordinator, but the majority of my time spent there has been back on the production end of it. I know as I was walking in, I was hearing some talk about home brewers. Don't feel you need to hold back on any technical brewing questions. I can probably answer them about any of these beers that we're going to try, from the brewing and bottling and cellaring, the whole 9 yards. It was a little tweak up to my back that kind of necessitated the change to a desk job, and now I just feel like I answer emails all day and long for the days that I used to wash kegs all afternoon, as weird as that might sound. But yeah, I got my foot in the door there, a couple-day-a-week part-time job back in 2010. And it wasn't very long before the gentleman, Bob Bale, was asking if I had a couple more days that I could contribute back on the bottling line. And I, immediately volunteered, said, sure, make me the brewer's bitch. I will do anything and everything it takes. I wanted to, whenever I got the bartending job, it was kind of, I always saw it as one of those foot in the door kind of situations. I wanted to sponge up as much information about this industry as I could and learn as much as I could about beer. And that's the great thing about small craft breweries, is that opportunity exists. You don't necessarily have to go to the Siebel Institute or go abroad and study brewing for a decade to get the opportunity. All you got to really be willing to do is learn, and then and there's always an opportunity to learn. I learn something new about beer just about every day. So, but in my current role, I get to travel around and check out some cool areas, cool bars, meet good people that are fighting the good fight and doing the right thing, offering flavorful beverages for you all to enjoy. We were in Missouri around the time that I started at Twisted Pine, but then had to pull out. The distributor was having some issues. This was about 3 or 4 years ago, when Scott reached out to us earlier in the year, telling us that he was familiar with our product from before, when we used to be available in the state, and he wanted to talk about, he was branching out, starting his own distributorship, and wanted to talk about bringing us back into the state. I jumped at the opportunity. The beer you guys will get to try last, and last for a reason. It's Billy's Chili's. It's a very distinct beer, and it makes memories with people fairly easy, memories that are not easily forgotten. And during the time between when we used to distribute and now, no kidding, I would do an average, I would receive on average about 6 or 7 emails a month from people in the St. Louis area that were looking for Billy's Chili's, wanted to know why they couldn't find it here anymore. It was a great day when I woke up and realized we had beer heading back here, and I could answer those emails in a positive manner and tell them that Billy's Chili's was heading back to the shelves. And we've got a lot of other good new options that we're happy to bring as well. But to kind of backtrack a little bit and kind of give you the story of our brewery. Twisted Pine was founded in 1995 in Boulder, Colorado, by a gentleman named Gordon Knight. That name might not mean that much to maybe all of you. Maybe 1 or 2 of you have heard of him. I bet I can make a reference here in a minute that'll sink it in for you. But anyways, in Colorado, especially within the craft brewing community, this guy is huge. He's legend. He in the late 80s through the mid-90s, he started a number of breweries around the Front Range of Colorado, a couple up in the mountains. I think the total number is 4 or 5. Twisted Pine started in '95, and he sold it to his good friend Bob Bale, my boss, a year later. Bob likes to say that Gordon liked to start breweries, but he really had no interest in running them. Hence why he started 5 breweries or so in like a little less than a decade. But he was really good at what he was doing. He was good at setting it up and then, passing the baton on to someone else. He is to my knowledge, the only brewer that's won 3 GABF gold medals with 3 different breweries, Twisted Pine being one of them. He won a GABF gold medal for the amber that he started Twisted Pine with in its very first year. That man has been paid tribute to by a number of Colorado breweries, probably most famously, as far as nationwide distribution goes, Oscar Blues years ago had a beer called Gordon's until they received a cease and desist letter from a spirits manufacturer with that same name, and now it's called G-Night, Gordon Knight. So the legend continues, and we're happy to do right by his name. Launching into the first beer. This is La Petite saison. We started making this about 5 years ago. It used to be a seasonal offering as saisons. That was kind of the tradition with saisons. They originated in Belgium centuries ago, and they were brewed to be ready for the harvest season. They're really light. They're refreshing. They were seen as a way to reinvigorate the farm hands that were doing all the work during the harvest season. Despite the fact that we name ours La Petite, that's a little bit tongue-in-cheek. This is 6.7% alcohol. It's a little on the higher side of the scale for this style, but I think you'll notice that it's pretty well masked. It's kind of one of those patio problems beers in the summertime where you're gonna put down a couple pints of it before you know what you're doing, and then gonna be drifting a little sideways. You'll hear the term farmhouse ale a lot too. For those of you that aren't familiar with saisons, I feel like the popularity's been building and building with this style over the last 5 or 10 years. So I'm sure most of you have at least encountered the word. You'll see farmhouse ale a lot of time. Those are almost always used interchangeably. You can refer to something as having farmhouse qualities, but if it's just a farmhouse ale, the saison, it's an equivalent. It all comes from the yeast. These are yeast strains that evolved from this seasonal brewing out in the farmlands of Belgium, and they give off a lot of their own character. There's a lot of fermentation flavor from this. Yeah. Oh yeah, I forgot to say I much prefer talking with people than talking at people. Please fire questions whenever you got them. Yeah, and if you look up the beer judging certification programs guidelines for it, there's not much of a color restriction. You can we've made black saisons, amber saisons, light saisons. It more speaks to the yeast used, and then there's a lot of freedom for creative reign within the confines of that style, which makes it one of the more fun beers to work with, and I think lends to its popularity as a style around the country because people can get creative. You can exercise a little bit of ingenuity with it, but it's all about the yeast, and we found a particular strain that we really liked, and therefore kind of built the beer, the rest of the recipe off of the yeast, and took kind of a blank canvas approach. Our grain bill on this is really simple. We hop it just enough to say we put hops in it. Basically, we want you folks to taste the yeast. Some people spice saisons with fruit peels, herbs, peppercorns, things like that. We don't, because again, we wanted you to taste what this yeast can do during fermentation. Part of that is we let the yeast kind of control the temperature during the early part of fermentation. We can control the temperature of the fermentation in our tanks, but we choose not to restrict this yeast with temperature control until about day 2 or 3, depending on how it's going, just because we want it to fire and heat up that beer as it's as it's going and release all these esters that are giving you a lot of the aroma and flavor in this beer. I get, sometimes a little bit of a tropical nose on it, more of kind of a lemon and peppercorn combo is what it gives to me. Of course, that's the great thing about beer. Everyone tastes it a little bit differently. Yeah, it's a favorite of mine. The final beer that we're doing is a 5-pepper chili beer. I think you can reuse the cups and it's not gonna affect the flavor. Okay. Extracurricular. Oh, I know what you're talking about. All you had to say was cojones. You had a question. IBUs on this, I want to say it's just a hair under 20. Yeah. 18, 19, somewhere in that range. Yeah. Sure. Oh, yeah, most definitely. At least the ones that I have it hammered in. It's always easy to remember those IBU numbers on the pale ales and the IPAs. I can give you the IBUs on that, but we need a whole nother measurement scale for that beer. Okay, that's a good little scattering. Good. Yeah, the next one I'm really excited to introduce to you. It's a newer beer. We underwent a little bit of a shuffle in our lineup last year, and got rid of a few older SKUs, older beers that we had been making for quite some time. Added in some new ones. Just try to breathe a little fresh life into the portfolio in general. This quickly became one of my go-tos. We call it Agaverus. We came up with an idea for a agave IPA. So the first thing that I won't say everybody, but a common misconception that people have is they expect it to be sweet. And I've come across the same thing when I'm presenting people with beers that have honey in it. And the easiest way to dispel that myth is just honey, agave nectar, any of these additional sugars that can be added to a beer. It's added more as a superfood for the yeast. It's a simpler sugar. It's not as much of a challenge for a yeast cell to tear that down into alcohol. So it just supercharges the first day or two of fermentation. And what it does for the overall effect of the beer is it does boost the alcohol a little bit. It lightens the body, and it really dries out that finish. So kind of the opposite of what some people think is sweet. It actually makes a drier beer. And this one, we have another IPA that we'll get to a couple down the road, the Hop Zealot, which is kind of more your American powerhouse IPA that's bitter. This one's not. It's 50 IBUs, putting it kind of right on the high side, outside the high side scale of a pale ale, but dry enough and light enough to where the hops that are in there really come through. And that doesn't stop us from dry hopping the hell out of it. We're going to give you the full experience of the hop aroma and flavor in it, but just not as much bitterness, which kind of makes it a good gateway IPA, if there's such a thing as that for people. I've turned a lot of people onto the style IPA by introducing them to this beer first, and then the next one after that, so they can kind of build their palate up for the bitterness. We hop it with a trio of Columbus, Amarillo, and Cascade. So some nice hearty Pacific Northwest hops. A lot of A lot of pine resin, a little bit of citrus. 7.1% alcohol. So another one, we kind of pride ourselves on packing a little extra percentage points into our beers, but without you really knowing about it. I feel like this is another one of those beers that can sneak up on you pretty quick. Any questions about this guy? Yeah. Funny story about this. So I mentioned the name is Agaverus, Agaveras. When I bring this out to festivals and it's on a sign, nobody knows how to say this word. From common mispronunciations like Agaverus and stuff like that to people that just either have had too much to drink or they're a different sort of dyslexic and they call it Avengers. I always tell them, no judgment here. It's a made-up Spanish word that we came up with anyways, so, we can't really fault you for mispronouncing it. We combine the word agave with veras, which is the truth. And then our tagline for it is, this beer is the truth, because it is. Trying to think if I left anything out on that guy. Liking the beer so far? Cool. We're about to start getting weird on this next one. We took it a little easy on the first two with you. We pride ourselves on stretching the spectrum of flavor pretty wide with our beers. Back at the brewery, we have 24 different tap handles, and that enables and rather encourages our brewers to be very experimental with what they're doing, and we play around with a lot of ingredients, a lot of styles, a lot of different processes. We have to keep those 24 tap handles full of our own beer all year long, so it requires just constant experimentation and piloting. A saison and even a IPA with agave nectar, and it doesn't even really begin to scratch the surface. It does. I would count on the fact that that probably a lot of you have never heard of the style braggot. I'm sure a few of you have. You look like diligent researchers out there, but believe me, most people haven't. And even funnier than that, when I take this one to festivals, people don't want to try to pronounce the name. It's braggot, and they feel like they're a little intimidated to even try to pronounce it. And I can tell immediately when someone walks up and they're looking at the sign that they're scared to say it, and I'm like, no, it's pronounced just like it's spelled, braggot. It's not a very attractive sounding word. It rhymes with two pretty nasty words. But it's an old style of beer. It dates all the way back to medieval Europe, where it evolved as a hybrid between mead and ale, so therefore relying on honey as well as grains for the fermentable sugars. Chaucer wrote about it in the Canterbury Tales. I mean, this thing's been around for centuries and centuries. Our take on it, we had a brewer back around the time that I started there that was really into the style. He loved to play around with them. Some of them were a lot closer to mead on the spectrum. This will be closer to beer. We put a substantial amount of honey in there, but probably more what you would call a strong honey beer than you would even think about calling a mead. On this one, once he had decided that he wanted to ferment it with a saison yeast, and we used the same yeast strain that we used for La Petite that you guys tried first off. Then we started kind of playing around with other ideas about Belgian beers. Most notably wit beers, where it's common to add a coriander and orange peel into the boil to give it a little extra flavor on the back end. But we figured we were already kind of going in a, forgive the pun, twisted direction with this beer, and we would take it a little further. We had recently found a citrus fruit called a Buddha's hand. If you've never seen one, the best way I could describe it verbally is it looks like an octopus lemon. It's kind of, you know, round, like a big lemon on top, but instead of tapering into that point at the bottom, it just sprawls out into these weird tentacles. I encourage you all to do a little Google image search on your phone. It's a crazy looking thing, and even crazier on the inside. You hack into this this citrus fruit, and there's no pulp or juice or seeds or anything that would resemble a fruit. It's just that spongy white pith all the way through. Makes it really easy to use for our purposes, more like a zest, where we just have to lop off the top stem and then feed it through a food processor to shred it up. And then to replace the coriander in that equation, we had one of our other brewers had stumbled upon these Tasmanian pepperberries, kind of, you know, similar to a black peppercorn. They're grown in Tasmania and on the mainland in Australia. They have got a little bit of like a dark berry hint to them as well. So kind of like a little bit of sweeter black pepper note, and we really liked the way it played with the citrus. And as I mentioned, this particular yeast strain kind of kicks off a little bit of that citrus and peppercorn anyways. So, yeah, it seemed to all tie together. Questions? We use a little bit of wheat malt in there. Probably if you're picking up a little extra mouthfeel, it's from the addition of the wheat malt. But other than that, I mean, I can't think of anything else other than the wheat malt that would really build up that sort of a texture in the mouth. Yeah, you? IBU is 24 on this guy. It's just one hop. We use Citra, kind of continuing along the citrus theme, and I believe you're probably getting a lot of that sweetness is kind of a mental sweetness. This beer is one of the drier beers that we do with the least amount of residual sugar left over. For the home brewers out there, it finishes at about 1.5 Plato. That is in large part due to the addition of the orange blossom honey that we add in there that really kind of helps charge. And this yeast strain is an absolute beast, and it just refuses to stop. ABV on this is 8.5, which actually for braggots is kind of probably towards the lower to mid side of the spectrum. We touched a little bit on how vague the style guidelines were for saison earlier. You go look up the style guidelines for braggot sometime, and I mean there's no limitations on either end of the scale for bitterness, for color, for the strength. I want to say it's listed as between 6.5 and 14 or something like that. I mean, it's one of the most vague beer styles you'll ever read. Yeah. Westbound Braggot. The first year we made this in 2012, we entered it into the Great American Beer Fest, and they have a subcategory for braggot that folds up into this specialty honey beer category, and it won the gold medal right out of the bat for us. We entered it the next year. It slipped down the podium a little bit to the bronze, but 2 for 2 we were pretty happy with. We didn't have any last year to enter, so this year was the third year, and unfortunately we couldn't keep the streak alive. I don't know if you can ever keep a 100% batting average going, but we'll keep sending it in and see how many more we can rack up over the years. It's a really unique beer. There's a lot going on in this. As you said right before you put it out, we were going to put the palates to the test with this one, but this won't be the end of it. We have some more palate challengers coming up. I see some puzzled faces out there, but I think that's pretty. I think that's to be expected. Yeah, you have a question. with a, I didn't hear the last part. This is the only braggot that we've made with a Belgian yeast strain. Generally, the main difference that I noticed other than those esters that you can pretty easily pick out when you're drinking a Belgian beer, is it won't get quite as dry even with the addition of honey. This yeast kind of like I mentioned before, goes the extra mile in regards to just chewing up sugars. So it's hard to get it this kind of. I didn't do it. I don't know. We never tried this particular recipe with all the different adjunct ingredients we've added into it with the different yeast, but it'd be a fun experiment. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, luckily for you, only 40% of our tastings tonight have Belgian yeast in them. And you've already gotten past those, too. Yeah. We don't do either. We use spining. We did filter for a number of years. Back in my days in the brewery, that was one of my charges. Man, what a pain in the ass that is. We decided to do a little bit more research into fining and other ways to clarify the beer without filtration, just because we were tired mainly of dumping a lot of really expensive hops into a beer and then stripping that aroma right back out of it on the filtration. We can clarify that beer in other ways, and if it's not crystal clear, that doesn't really bother us that much. We're an artisan brewery. We make small batches of beer, and we're okay if you can't see your partner through the other end of the glass. No. So I had mentioned earlier that in the last couple years we've shuffled up our portfolio. I'm assuming it's Hoppy Boy that you were mentioning earlier that Bob used to drive up to you in the mountains. So we had this beer. We don't have it here for you folks to try today, and I apologize for that. But it is one of our older recipes, Hoppy Boy. We've been making it since the late '90s, and it just became more and more apparent to us over the last few years that while this might the beer that I hate describing beers that aren't in front of you, but this is going to lead into this. Just bear with me for a second. While Hoppy Boy might have been a great example of an American IPA in the late 90s, it had kind of, it had lost that grip on that style for our consumers. And more so, not that people stopped drinking it. It's got a very, very strong and fanatical, loyal following. But for new people that would come in, see American IPA, the words Hoppy Boy, they were expecting something different. It's got a big, hefty malt backbone. It took a lot of needling on the ownership there, but we finally talked them into letting us redesignate Hoppy Boy as an American Pale Ale, where me and the rest of the brew team that's currently in place there thought it fit a little bit better, and that opened the door for us to introduce more of a hop-forward kind of powerhouse IPA. Something with higher bitterness, higher alcohol, just dry hopped all the way to the roof. So I'll introduce Hop Zealot. If you can't handle spicy stuff, yeah, maybe steer clear. Hop Zealots, it's really simple and straightforward, so it's not going to take me long to run through this one. Like I said, we wanted something that was gonna hit the palate a little bit more with hops. So this one is 70 IBUs, 7.4% ABV. Similar hop combination to the Agaverus with the Columbus and the Amarillo, but instead of the Cascade that we use on the finish with Agaverus, this one has Simcoe. It's a pretty. If you had a lot of beers with Simcoe in there, it's a pretty identifiable hop. Yep, we dry hop it with all three. Yeah, no, it's I mentioned before that Agaverus was kind of one of my go-tos, and it become my go-to. I go back and forth. I generally start with the Agaverus because it's not as bitter, and work my tongue up to this one. And not that it doesn't necessarily punish your palate. I mean, if you're accustomed to IPAs, it's not over the top. It's not a palate wrecker by any means. We leave enough sugar in there to balance it out. Yes. Hop Zealot, as in one that is zealous about hops. That's another one that I don't know what it is, if people don't read as much as they used to or what, but when I take this to festivals, nobody seems to recognize the word zealot until I give the overzealous remark, and then people pick up on it pretty quick. But people call it Zealot or Hop Zealot. So basically, I like to joke that in the last year and a half, we've introduced 2 IPAs that nobody can pronounce. so be it. But yeah, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, there's no hidden tricks in this one. It's just a poundable IPA. Get your lupulin fix. Any questions? Any further questions about this? We've already got chili beer, and I. I hear that a lot about this beer, and I've just from the start we were talking about fanatical followings for another beer earlier. This beer, like it or love it, and I think that it's kind of more maybe love it or hate it would be a more apt way to put it. If you don't like chili peppers, it's not going to be up your alley. But luckily for us, there's a pretty strong and passionate following for anything and everything that's spiced and hot in the world. Billy's Chilies. So we were a little bit ahead of the curve on chili beers. We've been making this for over a dozen years. Probably closer to 14 years we've been making chili beer. Whenever we first started making this, we were de-seeding. We were taking the time to de-seed and devein the chili peppers. And then the only complaint we got from people, because the people that don't like chili peppers, they only complain for a second. The people that like chili peppers, they complain forever that it's not spicy enough. They kept complaining about it, so we said, well, why are we taking 3 times as long to prepare this beer when all we really have to do is lop off the stem and then feed it through a food processor and shred it up. So now we leave all the seeds and stuff in there, so it's gonna have a little bit more heat than probably any other beverage you've tried. Oh yeah, this is my people. Yeah, it happens. Adventurous lot. I like you folks. Yes, you had a question. So we use, I was just getting into that, and I think there are 2 things that distinguish our chili beer from any other chili beer that might be out there for you to try. One, and I think a really important one, is using a range of chili peppers. You'll come across a lot of chili beers. It's a jalapeno this, or it's a habanero this, or a serrano brown, an Anaheim, a green pepper pilsner, whatever. There's so many styles of chili pepper out there, and they all have varying levels of sweet and heat, and you can do so much with playing around with the combinations of different chili peppers. It just baffles me why you would make a jalapeno beer or I don't know, but maybe that's just we've been doing it so long this way that we're just kind of set in our in our manners. But from weakest to spiciest, we use Anaheim, red Fresno, jalapeno, serrano, and habanero. So yeah, obviously we scale those weight wise towards the less spicy ones, because we want you to ideally be able to pick out something from each one. Now, I always I say that kind of tongue in cheek, because a lot of people tell me like, oh, I can taste each individual one, and I've been drinking this beer for 5 years, and I don't know, I couldn't tell you where the jalapeno stops and the serrano begins, that's for sure. But I do think that they all contribute something worthwhile to it. Yes, more questions? Okay. Oh man, the pairing question. I could do a whole nother hour about the things you can do with this beer, both side by side with food and infused with food. This is a cooking beer right here. You can't just stroll down the aisles of a grocery store and find a cooking ingredient quite like this that's got that beer. I mean, it's beer. It'll tenderize meats if you're using it for a marinade. It adds a nice texture and flavor to chilies or sauces or soups. But it also has that little bit of kick built in. And it does mellow out, I find, whenever I cook. Our states, just a real quick rundown. Outside of Colorado, we try to mainly keep it local. So we've got you folks here in Missouri, Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, a little block there. And then we do send small shipments to a distributor we really like down in Texas. Distinguish this beer from others. The first being using a range of different chili peppers instead of just relying on one varietal. The other is that we cold steep. Yeah, one different varietal is a little bit of a oxymoron. We cold steep it. So a lot of people, and especially the chili beers that rub me the wrong way, they add them into the boil. That's a really good way to make a vegetable stew, and that's kind of what it'll taste like, if you cook a chili pepper. We wait till post-fermentation. Once the beer's finished and we've chilled the beer inside the tank down to 30 degrees, then we chop all of our chili peppers fresh. Amount-wise, we make 30 barrels. I don't know why this bomb keeps dropping on me. The weird breathing techniques or something. I've been practicing my Lamaze. For a 30-barrel batch, which is about just a little under 1,000 gallons, we're using just over 100 pounds of fresh peppers altogether between the 5 different varieties. So it's substantial. It's a couple large nylon sacks full. We shred them all up confetti style in a food processor, put them into our conditioning tank, and then rack the 30-degree beer on top of it. I understand why a lot of breweries don't do it that way. It takes a while. I mean, at minimum a week during different parts of the year, sometimes a week and a half or more to extract this much flavor and aroma out of it at that temperature. But it's the only way to keep that flavor fresh. Like, you smell it. It's like cracking a pepper in half under your nose. And that's working with peppers, for anybody that's ever cooked with jalapenos or any chili peppers, you're aware that throughout the year, sometimes you get some and it's as meek as a bell pepper, and then sometimes you get one that just wants to, melt the nose right off your face. That's something we have to deal with. This is a really, really hard one to achieve ultimate consistency with. We've gotten really, really good at it because we've been doing it so long, but it just kind of takes waiting. And the first 5 days, nothing really happens. At 30 degrees, I mean, it would go faster if we did it heat, but like I mentioned before, we like the flavor of the cold steep a hell of a lot better. Chili peppers are this plant that's evolved this thick, waxy skin that's like everything proof. It's resistant to bugs, to frost, to water, to everything. And it takes about 5 days for the low alcohol in this. Quick aside, 5.2% ABV, 15 IBUs. There's not a lot of alcohol in it. it takes 5 days before it even starts to really break down the skin of those chili peppers. So we don't even really start tasting it till day 4. And then after that, we start tasting it a couple times a day just so we've got a good bead drawn on where it is and where the spice level is, and we're going to know when it's ready, and then we pull it. It's usually just about a week if everything happens right, if we got the right batch of peppers. Very rarely, because we do cherish the little punch that this beer gives people, we will go and add extra peppers if it's not getting spicy enough in time. But usually it's just kind of a wait for it mentality with it.